You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Creating Active Lives, where my special guest this week is Claire Jones. Claire is the founder and CEO of Your One Life Healthy Weight Solutions. She's a multi-award winning sustainable weight loss coach. Emphasis there on the word sustainable. She also works as a mentor, a therapist, and is a speaker, and has written and had published her book, How to Eat Less. And what Claire does is kind of help people learn how to manage their weight for life rather than for the life of a diet or something like that. And she's successfully managed her own weight over the last 12 years. So Claire, welcome to Creating Active Lives. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. My story is that I spent from my early teens up until my late 30s just on and off diets for I think about 25 years. And I didn't really know how to manage my weight at all. And I was either putting it on or losing it. There was no kind of happy medium, no place where I could sort of feel confident that I knew how to maintain my weight. And then eventually I kind of realised that this was not a life that I wanted to carry on living. I needed to make some changes for my health more than anything. And so then I was able to manage my weight successfully for the last 12 years. And what I think is really interesting is that it wasn't like one thing that made me go, right, that's it, I've had enough. It was a number of kind of things that sort of came together, but also my sort of the blend of my personal and professional background kind of came together really well, because I'd spent my early career as a prison officer. Then I went into drug and alcohol work in the community as part of the NHS. So I kind of understood kind of, how we behave around, food, drink, cigarettes, alcohol, various other sort of modern behaviours that we kind of have sort of fallen into difficulties with and need to perhaps address for our health and well-being. And then I went into senior management in the NHS, and I spent 20 years as a senior manager through managing various different services. And I was sort of seen from birth to death, and everything in between,
right.
And prevention to acute treatment, and again, everything in between. So I was able to kind of see what happens when we don't look after ourselves. And I realised that I had the power within myself to actually change my future.
It's a thing. You were talking about sort of drug, smoking, alcohol and things like that are substances that are frequently misused. Food is also frequently misused. The issue is that we can get to a point where we can avoid the other substances, but you can't avoid food. You need food. And this is where it's so difficult, isn't it, to learn to manage it, because you can't stay away from the food aisles like you can with the alcohol aisles and things like that. But there is an issue at the moment. We know that 64% of the adult population in the UK are either overweight or obese. And actually the figures for obesity are 26% of the population. So more than 1 in 4 of us. In the States, it's even worse. It's actually 69% overweight and obese and 36% who are obese. That's 1 in 3 people in the States is obese. And it's one of those trends, unfortunately, that we're lagging behind, but we're not that far behind. So how do we support people who have a problem with their weight, who have a problem where their health is suffering because of their weight? Because it's a lot of us.
Yeah.
A lot of us.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head earlier, and you say we can't live without food. We need food to be able to survive. But the problem is that the world we're living in is a world we're not actually designed for. We're designed. We put on weight, we put on fat as energy that we store because we didn't need it at the time that we ate it. We store it for later. It's a wonderful survival mechanism for us, so that we can store energy for when food is scarce. But the problem that we find ourselves in is that the world we're living in, food is never scarce for most of us who are fortunate to know where our next meals are coming from. Food is all around us. We live in a service economy and everything is revolving around food and drink. And at the same time, we're being bombarded with messages to say you need to lose weight. You've got to lose weight for your health. And yet the environment that we're living in is completely set up against that. So we've, as individuals within this society, if we want to be a healthy weight, we've got to find a way of managing it. And that, in terms of, the way that I sort of support people, the way that I work with them is really just remember that, when it comes to food, the bottom line is we're animals, and if you imagine what your pets are like, or when you go to the zoo at feeding time, what are they like? That's how we primitively respond to the food around us. And of course, the food manufacturers know this. So of course, they make it as tasty and delicious and addictive as possible. So we've got to find a way of managing this. So what I encourage people to do is to kind of remember that actually, what is it that sets us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom? It's the prefrontal cortex that we have in our very powerful, intelligent human brains. The trouble is we're not used to using it when it comes to food. But if we learn how to, which we can through training, then we can take healthy control over the decisions that we make around food. And be aware of, these strong biological influences and physiological and psychological influences that are around us all the time. And when we're aware of them, we can start to actually challenge them and start to change them. And remember that actually we get to decide what we put in our mouths. Nobody else makes us do anything.
It's so true, isn't it? It's like, not so much now, but we're taught how to cook, but we're not taught how to eat. And by how to eat, I don't just mean what we eat, but I mean responding to genuine hunger, understanding what hunger is, understanding how to eat slowly, and all sorts of different things. And you're right, we're surrounded by food. Go back 40, 50, 60 years, takeaways would have been limited to a fish and chip shop somewhere. Whereas now, not only are there takeaways everywhere, but you don't even have to go and walk to the takeaway to get your food anymore. You can have it delivered. So even the small amount of maybe activity you would have done to offset isn't there. And it's so difficult because it's like we've lost that ability to really think about how to eat and why we're eating as well. So you said you spent 25 years yo-yo dieting, and for a lot of people it is almost like a hobby, isn't it? Dieting, it's what shall I do this week? I know, I'll go on a diet. You've now spent 12 years successfully maintaining a healthy weight. So what was the trigger? What was the switch that's enabled you to do that?
Well, it was really a realization that I didn't want to accept my future to be the same as my past, in terms of being stuck on this roller coaster all the time and constantly being obsessed with food and wanting to eat more of it than I knew was good for me, and then thinking, oh well, I'll just have to starve myself to sort the problem out. And I was constantly in this very disordered pattern of eating and very poor relationship with food and with myself. And it was actually stopping smoking that was the catalyst, I think, for me, in terms of recognizing that I could actually control my behavior and could control it in a healthy way. Obviously, with smoking, we don't need to smoke to live, but we do need to eat to live. And for me, it was about actually, let's strip all the emotion out of it, because we get very emotional when we start thinking about weight and food. If we can just start by being objective and think, actually, if we get very emotionally attached to the food, it becomes very difficult to let it go. Whereas if we think, actually, I have a energy budget. There is a finite amount of energy that I can consume in a single day without storing fat. And obviously, if I want to lose fat, I need to be eating less than what my body needs. And it's the same as if you think about managing our money. We've got an unlimited amount of money that we can spend without going into debt. And the problem, I think, that we have is that this lack of awareness of how much energy is actually in our food. So by raising our awareness, both in terms of which part of our brain we're using, and also understanding the quantity of energy that's in our food, as well as obviously looking at trying to eat as healthily as possible within reason, bearing in mind that, perfection just doesn't exist. And it's impossible, I think, for most people to, get through life without resorting to eating biscuits and cakes and chocolate and all of the things that are, ultra delicious. But it's how do we put a sensible boundary around those things, and the rest of the time eating in a way that supports our health. But we still need, doesn't matter how healthily we eat, there is still a finite amount of energy we can consume before we start to store fat. So it's about actually, let's just think about this from an objective place and go, okay, so what's my budget and how can I get best value for my budget and not gain weight? And if you're trying to lose it, to actually create that deficit, but at the same time trying to make sure that you're maintaining sufficient nutrition for good health, which is why just starving ourselves or eating a really low amount of calories doesn't last, because our bodies and brains are very, very highly sophisticated machines. Then they fight back
Yes,
big time. There's only so long that we can last before something happens and we end up just throwing in the towel and ending up back where we started. We've got to learn how to work with our bodies and not against them. So that's what I basically started to do, was realize how do I work with my body rather than against it, and not try and burn the candle at both ends by like doing loads and loads of exercise and hardly eating anything.
Yeah. And we do, and anybody listening will be, we use words like comfort foods, we use words like treats, special occasions, rewards. We associate certain food, and I bet nobody out there is thinking comfort food, oh, salad, or treats, rice cakes. It's an automatic, almost unconscious association, isn't it, that comfort foods usually are quite carb heavy, rich, hefty foods, and treats are the sweets, the sugars, and things like that. And it's we talk about weight loss, and you're talking about deficit. Ultimately, your energy balance has to be right for whether you want to maintain or lose weight. But actually, there are so many influences around how that works that it's not enough to say eat less than you burn off. There are too many influences out there. We also need to know a lot more about how our body reacts to foods, and what makes us want to eat more of something and what makes us want to eat less. And we're bombarded by advertising the entire time. We're being bombarded by advertising, and that hits us on a very subliminal level, doesn't it? So
Absolutely.
Getting that prefrontal cortex to sort of wake up and say, hang on a minute, how do we do that? What are the most common problems people come to you with then? Because I think that will take us into how we solve them.
Yeah. Well, consistency, I think, is the number one thing that people struggle with. They say, I know what to do, I'm just not doing it consistently. That's the main thing. But also I do get quite a lot of people come to me and say, well, I eat really healthily, but I don't understand why I'm not losing weight. And it's that lack of awareness of actually how much energy we're consuming, and this assumption that if we eat healthily, we're going to be doing all right. So it's about how we get best value between, the nutrition and the calories, and also the taste. Because obviously, if we're filling ourselves with food that we don't like, we're not going to stick at anything, are we? We've got to enjoy what we're eating, and also I need to lose a stone in the next couple of months, or I need to lose weight quickly. And that is, the problem is that it's always going to take longer than we want it to take, and probably significantly longer than we want to take if we want to do it properly and be able to keep it off. Those are the main things.
I think this is an expectation that people have, is that weight loss will be linear. People will talk about £1 or £2 a week. Yeah. It's never linear. Yeah. It's never linear. I always say to people, let's look at an average over the next 2 months, because some weeks you might lose £2, other weeks you might actually lose £0.5 or even gain £0.5. It's what happens over a period of time, because
that's right.
It's never linear.
In the 3 years I've been working, there's one client that's consistently lost weight every single week. One.
Only one, yeah.
One.
And
even that, I was surprised, to be fair, because that is extremely rare. And it's interesting as well, because we kind of think, well, we've got to stick to this many calories every day as well. And I've actually got a client who I asked if I would be able to share a screenshot of her data, which I'm going to be doing in my group, because it's a really good example of how you can have different amount of calories each day and still lose weight, as long as over on balance you're getting the right amount to stay in a deficit over that period of time. Because no 2 days are alike for many people. You think about our different schedules and think about what goes on during the week versus the weekend, and of course we continually beat ourselves up because we're being naughty at the weekends. And that's another thing that I feel quite strongly about, is the language that we use around our behaviour around weight, and like good and bad and naughty and should and all of those things, that we've got to challenge, because losing weight is, in my opinion, the hardest thing to do, because in order to do it, we have to fight against our biology. We're not designed to lose weight voluntarily, and that is the problem. But we seem to expect that if we just eat less, it will just happen. And there are, as you said, so many influences on our behaviour, and it's ultimately what it comes down to is behaviour change that needs to happen. It's not the quick fix of following a diet, because that doesn't actually change our behaviour. It just gives us a regime to follow for a period of time, but we don't learn anything.
And it's so important, isn't it, to look on the behaviour change aspect of it, because you are going to need to change your behaviours in some way. Now, for some people, it might not be a huge amount. Others, it may well be a big shift in their behaviour. But it is not going to happen overnight. Again, is it? You're not going to go from eating unhealthily or eating a lot of food to eating healthily and less food overnight. It will not happen. And if you try and do it, it will just go horribly wrong. And this is where, behaviour change is one of my things, as people know. It's about what small step can I take today? What small step can I take tomorrow? What's going to be manageable for me at this point? But it's also looking at what you've got coming up. If your best friend's getting married, or you're going off on an all-inclusive holiday, with the best will in the world, you're not going to follow a strict diet. So it's okay, so how can I minimize the impact that this is going to have on me, because I still want to enjoy myself?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that I like to think about this, if you think it's about relearning how to eat, in a way that is supporting our health. And I often liken it to a bit of a similar journey to when you learn how to drive, because when you first learn, you don't go from getting in that car that first time to be able to drive safely and competently and confidently on a motorway. You have to go through a whole process. And it's the building blocks of that process and the continued learning. Same when you learn any new skill. And this is what it's all about. And yet we seem to be able to think we should self-teach it. But why? When it's one of the hardest things in life to be able to do, because we are literally fighting against our survival instincts.
That's it. And you wouldn't get in a car and teach yourself to drive. it would be highly illegal, but also a very, very bad idea. You find somebody qualified to teach you how to drive. And this is where I think for a lot of us, because we've lost a lot of the healthy eating that we used to have. If you go back sort of 50, 60 years, most people's diets were healthier purely because we didn't have the processed foods. A lot of people didn't have fridges or freezers, which meant that everything was cooked fresh every single day. And you just didn't have the abundance of fast food, processed foods that we had now. We've almost unlearnt what healthy, we've forgotten what it is, or we've never learned it in the first place. So you're right, we have to go back to finding out what that is. And as I say, you're not going to go from a lot of processed food to a salad overnight. It's for me, it's like it might be adding a bit more broccoli to something, or it might be having a small side salad with your meal, or a bit less butter. Butter's my downfall, I have to admit. But this is where you need somebody to act as your support, to act as your guide, and to keep you educating yourself, rather than just telling you follow this plan. It's somebody who educates you about why you're following it, how to fit it in with your lifestyle and things like that. So what's your thing now? I know, because obviously we've worked together a little bit, but I know that you are a fully qualified fitness instructor as well. So what do you feel is the role of activity and exercise in weight loss?
Okay, yeah, now this is the kind of like a bit controversial. So one of the things that I kind of say to my clients, my audience, is do not try to do lots of exercise and cut your food intake down at the same time, because all you will do is burn the candle at both ends, make yourself really hungry, and then not be able to follow whatever regime you've decided to put in place for yourself. So I believe that obviously activity, movement, general movement, getting up and moving around as often as you can is vital for good health, as well as obviously supporting our bodies to burn some energy. But unfortunately, our bodies don't burn anything like as much energy as we like to think they do when we do formal exercise. It takes up something like 5% of our overall daily energy expenditure. So if you're going for a run or going an hour in the gym and then you're sitting down the rest of the day, you're actually not really going to make much inroads into it. And it really frustrates me when the food tracker apps, which I think are brilliant, then say you have earned this many calories in exercise. No, you haven't, because they don't take into account what your body is doing the rest of the time. And so, of course, you might end up eating back the 400 calories that you thought you'd earned, when actually you might only have burned 200. So in effect, you might actually be in a 200 calorie surplus and not realizing it, and go, why am I not losing weight? So the exercise is vital, but strenuous exercise, especially for women, is a great appetite booster. So we want to avoid doing enough exercise to trigger the appetite in that way. So, shorter periods of exercise, it's about figuring out the right sort of, length of time, the right type of exercise, the right intensity of the exercise that suits you. And it can be a bit of trial and error. So for example, I know if I go for a really long run, I'm going to be starving the rest of the day and probably the next day as well. So I've got to keep a close eye on what I'm eating in response to that, because my body is crying out for me to replace what I've burned. It's not so much of a problem for men, but for women, this can be a really big issue. And it's something that people say to me time and time again. I just did all this weight training in the gym and now I'm starving hungry for the rest of the week. And then it becomes really hard to stay focused on the food intake. So the way that I often recommend that people do it is go through periods of time where they focus more on diet, or in terms of getting the energy intake down, and ease off the exercise. So that's not to say don't do any, that's just keep to gentle, brisk walking. Brisk walking is brilliant for weight loss, but running, not so much, because of how it stimulates the appetite. Certainly in my experience, and many people that I work with. So running is great for when you're in a period where you're perhaps trying to maintain your weight. So rather than trying to focus on losing weight all the time, cycle between the two. Periods of time where you focus more on the diet, then periods of time where you can up the exercise, focus on maintaining your weight, eating a bit more, because you can eat more to support and fuel the exercise. Because if we're doing lots of exercise and when we're eating less, we're not fueling the exercise that we're trying to do. So it's like trying to run a machine or a car without enough fuel. It's ludicrous when you take a step back and think about it. So,
but it's really, for me, it's all about minimizing sedentary time. Don't sit around so much. Everyday activity, brisk walk to the shops, do some gardening. Also, if you are starting to think about managing your weight, starting to do weight loss, starting to change the way you eat, and you throw exercise into the mix, chances are you haven't been exercising already. So it's two new things. It's like trying to learn to drive a car and learn to knit at the same time. Not going to happen. It's going to be dangerous. So pick one, focus on one. Like you say, once you've got your weight loss happening, then you can start to think, okay, right, how can I build more activity into my life to support it? But also don't think of exercise necessarily as your weight loss priority. Think of it, this is going to strengthen my muscles. This is going to strengthen my heart and lungs. Take that sort of weight loss away. And even the American College of Sports Medicine, the guidelines for weight loss, if you are not looking at what you eat, it's something like 300-400 minutes a week, which for most people isn't manageable. So this is where, yes, build activity into your everyday life, which everybody knows that's what I'm all about. Build activity into your everyday life, because that's going to support you rather than hinder you. And also, you're not trying to focus on two new things at once, because you'll drop one of them and then
And
you'll feel disappointed.
that's what made the difference for me. It was when I stopped trying to do them both at the same time and I started cycling between them. That was it. It solved the problem. Absolutely solved the problem. And I started thinking about, the exercise for the enjoyment of the exercise as opposed to the burning of the calories, and
Yes.
doing things that I really enjoyed, and just enjoying being out in nature, and just feeling healthy, and changing my whole perception of that, and thinking about, okay, so now that thinking about what to eat, how can I ensure that what I'm eating is going to support my activity?
Yes. And that's
And
it.
be
But
healthy.
it's like you say, it's cycling between them, a little period of each. There's
Mm.
nothing wrong with a plateau in weight loss as
Mm.
long as it's not a permanent one, but actually it gives your body time to adjust to
Yeah,
a new way of
yeah.
being,
Our bodies
which
don't want us to be
is
losing weight all the
we
time.
need. Yeah,
They
that's it.
don't
It's
want us
not
to.
healthy.
No.
You need those little periods of adjustment.
Yeah.
And I just think it's so important that people get the right support.
Mm.
But it has to fit with their lifestyle as well, doesn't it? Because there's no point in saying, oh,
Absolutely.
you've got to change all of this. And they go, but I've
Yeah.
got this, 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 and this going on. It's not going
Yeah.
to happen. You've got
Exactly.
to work with the client's lifestyle. You've got to
Yeah.
work with almost sort of likes and dislikes
Yeah.
as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we've
Yeah.
all got different preferences. There is no one size fits all, and it's about working out what's going to suit you best, and in the context of real life, and also the times when you might need to dial up the effort and times where you might need to dial the effort down, because it's just not feasible to try and lose weight when there's something really chaotic going on. It may be that, okay, the priority now is just to tread water till I'm ready to go again, and just not go
And that's it,
backwards.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really anyone who's worked with me before knows this. Get to know your client, get to know yourself, because if you get to know your patterns and the way you respond to things, if you don't respond to deprivation, banning, don't eat this, then don't do it. Allow yourself a small piece of chocolate, allow yourself a biscuit. Quite often when you say things are allowed, because it takes away the sort of the naughtiness, to quote the bad word, you actually think, well, because I can have it, I don't want it.
Yeah. Yeah. I say you
I'll
can
have
have
it next
whatever you
tomorrow.
like, whenever you like. You know what it tastes like. You don't have to have it now.
Yeah.
You know.
You can wait, but it's the more we ban things and the more we give foods this forbidden status, the more of course
That's it.
you crave them.
That's it.
And
I
I
like to
just
think. Sorry,
yeah,
I like to think 80-20 principles, because that you've got your 20% for whatever you fancy. No pressure.
yeah,
As long as you're getting your 80%, no problem.
that's it. But also I find that the healthier my diet is, the more I dislike the taste of some of these foods, because I just think, oh, I can taste the saccharine or the sweetness, or I can taste this just doesn't taste right. And I think by allowing your taste buds to change gradually, you're going to be much more aware of the less healthy foods. I'm not using the word unhealthy. Just they are less. There's less nutrient value, should we say? But you start to notice that, don't you? And you start to think, actually, I'm not enjoying this the way I used to. I'm not enjoying it as much. Or you're satisfied with a much smaller amount, um, and then it just becomes easy, because it's just part of who you are, isn't it? So, just how long does it take? Because people are going to want to know, how long is it going to take me to start losing weight? And I know that's going to be a piece of string answer. How long is a piece of string answer? But
It will be. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I just say it's always going to take longer than you want it to, but the time's going to pass anyway, so you may as well get on with it.
yeah. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer if you don't start.
Exactly.
So,
One foot in front of the other. Learn how to be consistent. Rather than think about the end goal and the timescale. I never work with timescales because it's just not feasible for most people and will always end in disappointment. So rather than focus on the end goal, focus on what do you need to do today
yes,
that's in support of your goal, and just keep rinsing, repeating, in the same way as if you're going to walk on, climb a mountain, go on a hike. You just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And if you keep turning around every now and then and see how far you've gone, you will see that actually making some progress. And just keep rinsing and repeating, but making sure that we're not kind of, as you said, cutting out all of our favourite foods. Find that balance. 80-20 is brilliant, because
yeah,
if you're on a diet of, say, 1,600 calories, that gives you 300, I think it's 360, I need to work out in my math, about 360 calories a day. of whatever you fancy.
Yeah.
You still got the rest of your calories to be really healthy, you know. And that could be on a weekly or a daily basis. It doesn't really matter. It's, you know, managing social occasions, things like that. You just keep rinsing, repeating, you know, the things like, you know, making sure you're getting some movement in every day, making sure that you are actually in the calorie deficit you need to be in, or maintaining. The key thing is to make sure you don't go into reverse. That's more important than anything else. It's just not going into reverse. So if you cycle between maintenance and loss, but not go into reverse, you're winning, you know, because if you think about the gap where you would be if you were not working on it, you may well be regaining the weight. So even if you're maintaining where previously you might have regained, then you're still making progress. So yeah, so calories, making sure that, and whether you're counting them or not, it's just, you need to be in a deficit if you want to lose weight. You need to know whether you're in a deficit. So getting enough sleep, you know, managing our stress levels, getting enough water, making sure we're moving every day. So what are the inputs that we need to be doing every day? And gradually, you know, doing a stock take. Where are we at the moment? Where can we start making those gradual improvements? And what's the number one non-negotiable that, you know, if you don't do, you're not going to get the results?
And most people know, don't they, what they're... But it's like anything, isn't it? If you are planning on climbing a mountain, you wouldn't just go and climb a mountain. You'd do your research. You'd find out what else you needed to know. You'd start with a couple of hills. You'd start by improving your fitness. So it's not just about the food you eat, is it? It's about your environment. It's about so much more. And like you say, sleep comes into it. We know that poor sleep impacts on how we eat. We know that stress levels at a time when actually eating healthier foods would benefit us, eating more nutritious foods would be of a really good benefit when we're stressed, is when we actually sometimes turn to the less nutritious foods. So it becomes a double whammy, is our bodies can't sustain the emotional or psychological stress. And there's so much more to it, isn't there?
Oh yeah. This is why my
just
program is 6 months, because there's a lot to it. There's a lot to learn if you want to learn how to manage your weight properly. Yeah.
But you don't decide to climb a mountain or run a marathon and do it the next day. It takes time, and usually, like you say, it takes longer. So instead of saying I've got to do it in this length of time, it's saying, right, I'm going to start today and start my journey today. Because like you say, you know, if you start today, you'll get there a darn sight quicker than if you start next Monday or next month.
And we don't have to just, you know, rip up everything and do something completely different. It's just what, like you said, what small changes can we start making to help us to get on that track?
Do you think there's a value in kind of actually spending some time working out how and when and what you eat? So you're aware of habits rather than just saying, right, I'm going to change everything. Is spend a week just logging it.
Yeah.
And saying, right, oh gosh, Josh, I snack at that time every day. I eat this, or I crave these every day. So being really aware and then just looking at one small thing.
Absolutely. That's where I start with most people that come to me, is like, okay, so what is going on for you right now? We need to understand what's going on for you right now. Otherwise, how do we know what we need to change?
Yes, that's it. It's so good to talk to you, because I think, you know, for me particularly, behaviour change is kind of involved in every area of our life, and it is, you can't change something until you know what it is that you want to change. And often our eating habits have developed over decades. So to suddenly say we're going to change them, you actually need to really think about what you want to change, but also what you don't want to change.
Exactly.
If you like a glass of wine on a Friday night, if you like a bit of chocolate on a Monday evening, you know, you don't want to make your life miserable.
No. I often talk about, if you're going to take something away, you've got to replace it with something of equal or better value, preferably non-food related. Otherwise, you're always going to feel like you're missing out on something. And I think, you know, it's important to remember that the way that we choose to eat now is what feels comfortable. So, of course, it is going to feel uncomfortable if we change anything. So, of course, we don't want to be changing everything. If we're already dealing with very, very busy, stressful lives, going on a diet is just adding more stress. So how do we do it in a way that's going to minimise the impact, as opposed to just immediately put ourselves into massive conflict with ourselves? Because obviously, as I said earlier, we are fighting our biology as soon as we decide we want to lose weight. And that's really hard. So no wonder it's hard. We might get results initially, but we most of the time we tend to grind to a halt after maybe a few weeks.
And it's being aware of the habits, changing the habits. And once you've changed one tiny little thing, you're like, oh, I can do this. I always say to people, if you always have biscuits with your coffee, get your coffee in a takeaway mug, go for a walk, because you may well walk down the road with your takeaway coffee, but you probably won't be walking down the road with a packet of biscuits in your hand. So just shifting the environment you have your coffee in can often just change that. So, but it's being aware of that, isn't it? You have to be aware of that in the first place.
First step, starting to be aware, and then you can start to look at what needs to change.
3 top tips then that people can do now.
Okay. There's 3 that go very, very well together. And I know, obviously, we've spoken about just implementing one thing at a time, but I do think these 3 things, when done well together, work a treat. Sorry, pardon the pun. So the first one is just make sure you're hungry before you eat anything, because if you're not hungry, your body does not need the food. And if your body does not need the food, what's it going to do with it? It's just going to store it as fat. So we've got to be hungry, not starving hungry, but, about 7 out of 10 on the hunger scale. And obviously tuning into that is really, really important. And so that's the first one. And I appreciate that's quite difficult if we're used to habitual snacking and emotional eating and things like that. But it's remembering to switch on that rational part of our brain and go, just ask the question, am I hungry at the moment? If the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, check in again in half an hour. Just say, I'll come back later. So it's not saying no, it's saying just not yet. Second one, eat slowly. Because when we eat slowly, we give our brain the chance to catch up to the fact that actually we've had enough food, and we start to notice that actually what we're eating starts to feel less enjoyable. And if we can stop at the point where it's just starting to feel like okay, as opposed to being absolutely delicious, then we know that that's our cue to stop. So obviously that takes a little bit of effort to stop when we're used to, we're hardwired to eat everything that's in front of us, because that's, going back to the animal kingdom, and that's how animals behave, it's like feeding time at the zoo. So we've got to learn how to override that natural instinct. But of course, once we start seeing, well, actually, this is how much I eat, and then I notice I start feeling like it's really not that enjoyable anymore. It was at the beginning, but now it's kind of, it's okay. That's the time to stop. And then you can see, well, that's what I need to serve myself next time. And then the final sort of tip really is to say stop. Yeah. So make sure you're hungry, eat slowly, stop when you've noticed that you've started to feel satisfied.
And there's often a point, isn't there, where you think, oh, there's only a couple of mouthfuls left, I may as well eat them. So it's that the point is you stop before you get there. And there is a point, isn't there, where you're kind of thinking, oh, I've had enough now.
Yeah, and then you go past that and you go, oh, I feel terrible. But yeah, I've got this thing called the law of diminishing taste. So it's a little graph and where you stop where you've had enough. But I think the other useful way to think about this is if you imagine that, our stomachs are stretchy balloons really inside of us, and they can stretch quite a lot if we're used to eating quite a lot. And of course, when we start eating less, it feels like it shrinks. And so if you imagine when you first blow up a balloon, and it's a brand new balloon that's never been blown up before, you might have to kind of pull it a bit to kind of make it a bit more malleable. You start blowing and it reaches a point, doesn't it, where it's really hard to blow. It kind of stops. But then you take another breath and you push through. And of course, every time we're pushing against that feeling of fullness, we're allowing our balloons to get used to being stretchy. Whereas if we stop at that point where we notice this is the point of resistance and this is enough, then we can help to safeguard our future portion control, rather than think, oh, this is so nice, and just keep pushing. Because if we keep pushing through, we will always want to eat more. Whereas if we can imagine that we're just getting to that point where that balloon is still resisting, and stop there, if we imagine that and sort of visualize that can be really helpful.
Oh, brilliant. So where can people find you if they want to find out more about what you do? I mean, I'll put a link to your book, How to Eat Less, when the podcast goes out, but where else can people find you?
They can find me on my website, www.youronelife.co.uk, or Facebook and Instagram at YourOneLifeUK.
Brilliant. I will put the links in. Claire, thank you so much for coming on, because it's such an important area, and it really fits in with my whole theme of creating active lives, because we're not talking about let's go out and do loads of exercise. We're saying, just a little bit more activity in your everyday life, because apart from anything else, it will probably distract you from any kind of cravings or anything like that. So thank you for listening to this episode of Creating Active Lives with my guest, Claire Jones. I hope you've got some ideas about what you can do to start managing or losing weight. So Claire, is there anything you want to add?
No, just thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's been really lovely speaking with you today.
Thank you. And I put all the links so that you can find Claire. And don't forget, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, please do. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.